Well, good morning. It's a beautiful day indeed, and I'm glad to be back with you. A one-day hiatus. Sometimes it gets like that, right? Everybody, I think we all have our days when it's like, okay, just had a bad night's sleep. Basically, that was all it was. And I came down here in the morning and sat down and looked at everything and said, yeah, not happening today. What are you gonna do, right? It's life. Sometimes you have those kind of situations. But I'm glad to be back with you. It's a nice day, beautiful weather we've got here on the East Coast, and so I hope you'll be able to get out and enjoy a little bit of it today. Weekend's looking a little out here, but we'll survive. It's good. So let me say good morning to all of you that just were so kind to jump right in here. Joanne, good morning. Jennifer, good to see you as well. Donna and Derek, good morning. Larry and Jane, good morning. Wow. At the dentist, huh? Oh my gosh. Well, let everybody at the dentist office watch. But so yeah, we're going to continue on here in the Gospel of Mark, and we'll finish up chapter 12 today. And it's interesting what happens here at this point. Jesus has been dealing with the scribes and the Pharisees and some of the things that they're throwing at him to try to test him and all of that. And so basically he decides to go in for the kill shot. Rhetorically speaking, all right, he decides he's going to just forever silence these people. All right, so we'll pick it up in verse 35. Jesus answering began to say, as he taught in the temple, "How is it that the scribes say that the Christ is the son of David? David himself said in the Holy Spirit, 'The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put thine enemies beneath thy feet.' David himself calls him Lord. And so in what sense is he his son?" And the great crowd enjoyed listening to him. And in his teaching, he was saying, "Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and like respectful greetings in the marketplaces, and the chief seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets. They are the ones who devour widows' houses and for appearance's sake offer long prayers. These will receive greater condemnation." And he sat down opposite the treasury and began observing how the multitude were putting money into the treasury. And many rich people were putting in large sums. And a poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which amounted to a cent. And calling his disciples to him, he said to them, "Truly I say to you, this poor widow put in more than all the contributions to the treasury. For they put in out of their surplus, but she, out of her poverty, put in all she owned, all she had to live on." So Jesus is here challenging some of the prevailing mindsets, the prevailing understanding, the prevailing wisdom of his day, the conventional wisdom, I guess, if you want to put it in a more contemporary fashion. And his teaching on David was meant to point out simply how the teachers of that time were clueless, that they, in their attempt to understand scripture, in their attempt to try to bring it out for public consumption, they just didn't know what they were talking about. They had no clue. Yet they paraded themselves around as if, they were the top of the heap, that they had it all, that they could be, that they were the only ones really who could tell people what God really meant in the Bible, in the scriptures of their day, which of course was the Old Covenant scriptures. And so, Jesus here is really wanting for for them and for us to recognize that our intellectual pursuit of truth is always going to fall short. Yet it's such a prevalent kind of a pursuit that we have. We want to try to figure things out with our human minds. And in so doing, we actually put up a wall that prevents God from showing us what he really means in what he's written in this book. We've got to be so wary of our attempt to try to understand, interpret, make sense of what's in the word. Because when we do that, when we try to understand it, when we try to teach it or comprehend it without benefit of the relationship that we have with him, we're going to miss it every time. And that's in effect what he was trying to illustrate here in these different scenarios that we see. The first one where he's talking about the paradox of David having the Messiah as his son, yet at the same time, when David was alive, he's referring to a Lord, that is between him and the Lord, right? It was like, well, how do you even understand that? Well, people couldn't, because they had no concept of a Messiah that was coming the way Jesus came, as a suffering servant. Okay, so he's talking about that. He's talking about how the scribes simply occupy their position and want people to respect their position, even if they don't deserve that, because what are they doing for the people? Not a whole lot, right? And then, of course, he challenges the prevailing wisdom concerning giving. Looking at all these rich people pouring in, money into the treasury, typically you would look at that and say, wow, they're really giving a lot. But Jesus points out that it's not the amount, it's really how much of what they had were they willing to give. That the large sums that these people were putting into the treasury was in effect a drop in the bucket. It was like chump change, for them. It didn't mean anything. But for a widow who had nothing other than 2 small coins, giving that out of her poverty, where she had nothing to live on once she did that. In other words, she had to trust God. She had to have a different understanding of the Lord himself to be able to say, okay, this is all I have, but Lord, I love you and I want to honor you. I want to give into your work. And so I'm just going to trust you that after I give this, that you're somehow going to provide for me. The rich folk, they had nothing, they had no need for that, because they were giving out of their surplus. They were giving out of whatever extra money they had laying around that they didn't need at the moment, so there was no sacrifice there. And so Jesus here is challenging the prevailing mindsets and understandings of the people of his day. And we've got to realize how important that is, that if I'm not willing to challenge my assumptions, if I'm not willing to expose myself to God and to his revealing that things I'm thinking that I think are right really aren't. See, that's not a good thing, because I can then simply go through life missing out on so much because I've made up my mind about it. And why would I think any differently? Because it seems right to me, And so Jesus here, in challenging these mindsets, is also challenging us to realize, hey, you know what? There could be things that we think are right that really aren't. And if we're not open to that, if we're not willing to challenge the assumptions that we've made and the ideas that we have held and believed for probably years, then we're definitely going to miss out. And it's interesting that Paul really expands on this idea in his first letter to the Corinthians. In chapter 1, he talks about how the word of the cross is foolishness to the world. In other words, this idea of salvation coming through the crucifixion the death and the resurrection of Jesus is like, what? That's crazy talk. A lot of people have that opinion. And unfortunately, their opinion, which they hold to, is not going to be helpful for them when they have to stand before God, right? So he talks about how there is this conflict between the wisdom of God and the so-called wisdom of the world, right? It says that consider your call, brethren. This is verse 26 of chapter 1, that there were not many that were wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble, but God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise, and God has chosen the weak things of the world to shame the things which are strong, and the base things of the world, and the despised God has chosen, things that are not, that he might nullify the things that are, that no one should boast before God. So, the Lord's priorities, his ideas are so opposite, right, to what we think. He is looking for things that most people who don't know him, and some that do, would never consider important. But yet that's the way he operates. He is going to look at the things that for him are most important, and all of these people that are weak, that are lowly, that don't have anything, well, those are the folks that are most open to change, because they realize, you know what, this is just, I don't like the way I'm living. Whereas folks that think they have it all together, and maybe they do, maybe they're doing well, they don't see the need to make any wholesale changes in their life. So there's a wisdom that the world has. We're seeing this playing out, obviously, in our current political situation, where people are constantly arguing about what's the best ways to handle things. And it seems like there are some very unconventional things going on that are getting results. No matter where you sit on the political spectrum, right? There's some things happening that seem pretty significant. And the methodology that was used was one that was totally different from what anybody else had ever tried. All right. And so that's an example, in a very small sense, of what the scriptures are talking about here, that there's a wisdom that God has that to the world looks like foolishness. But in God's eyes, in his economy, what people consider wise in human terms, he looks at as foolishness. And so, the phrase, the wisdom of fools, is really a double-sided phrase, because if you're trusting in your human wisdom, well, then your wisdom is the wisdom of fools. But if you start out in that low place, recognizing, you know what, the world looks at me as a fool, but the Lord looks at you as someone who's wise because you're willing to receive his wisdom. It's just amazing, right? So you look at chapter 3 of 1 Corinthians, and starting in verse 18, he writes, "Let no man deceive himself. If any man among you thinks he is wise in this age, let him become foolish, that he may become wise. For the wisdom of the world is foolishness before God. For it is written, he is the one who catches the wise in their craftiness. And again, the Lord knows the reasonings of the wise, that they are useless. So then let no one boast in men, for all things belong to you, whether Paul or Apollos or Cephas or the world or life or death or things present or things to come, all things belong to you, and you belong to Christ, and Christ belongs to God." So when we're in this relationship with the Lord through Christ, we have everything. See, that's what's so amazing. You humble yourself before him. You say, "Oh man, Lord, I realize that what I thought was good and right and wise, it really isn't. And so I'm just going to take that, throw it away, so that you can give me the true wisdom." And I talk about this a lot. Several occasions I've mentioned this concept here because it's so vital. If we're going to enjoy the life that he created us for, if we're going to enjoy the relationship that he created us for with him, this is the path. We've got, as Jesus said in many occasions, we've got to become like a child and take off our human wisdom, our human ways of thinking and understanding in favor of this low place of simply saying, all right, Lord, show me, teach me, bring that wisdom to me that the world looks at and says, that's just stupid. How could you be, part of that? How could you believe that? But that's the world. And I don't want to embrace their wisdom because obviously, as Paul brings out, it's futile, it's foolish when God, when you compare it to what God says. So, the encouragement that I have for you today is that when we stay in that place of childlike trust and childlike receptivity of what he wants to tell us, there are no limits. We have taken off the limits that our human thinking imposes upon us, because now I'm not trusting in my human thinking. If I don't understand something, I now can come to him and I can say, hey, could you explain that to me? Because I'm not getting it. It's just my brain can't function. It's just not wrapping itself around this idea, or you hear something or notice something that the world is saying and doing, and you kind of know it's not right, but you're not sure why. Could you help me with that? What's going on there? I want to understand this and see this from your perspective. And he'll do that every time because he wants us to be filled with his wisdom, with his knowledge, with his understanding. Why? So that we're successful in what he's created us for here on this earth and in the relationship that we have with him. So I just love that. I mean, it's like, wow, the freedom that we now have to dialogue with him about these things, to be spared the deception that's in the world over all this stuff that's going on around us. I mean, it's, if you're paying attention, there's some really interesting and in some cases weird stuff that's going on. And so being able to have his wisdom, his insight, his understanding, man, that is priceless. So let's enjoy that and let's encourage one another in that. And, I think it's good. I'm very happy and very thankful for that. So let's say good morning to the rest of our crew that jumped in. Let's see, Jackie, good morning. Giovanni, good to see you. Marie, yeah, happy Friday. Absolutely. Catherine and German, Cindy and Susan, thank you all. Appreciate it so much that you take a few minutes to just hang out, and look forward to being back with you again on Monday. Hope you have a great weekend. If you would be so kind as to share this so that others will hopefully see it, and we'll get a few more jumping in with us here on our weekday morning get together at 8:30 Eastern. And again, reach out if you'd like to chat about anything. I'd love to hear from you. And once again, all these are over on the Breakfast with Jesus 247 page. So have a great day. It's a beautiful one. Get out there and enjoy it. And I look forward to being back with you on Monday. So until then, you be blessed.
Thank you, Lord, for a beautiful day. Thank you, Lord, for a beautiful day.